She was cast out from a world that never wanted her, a girl barely bloomed, with the weight of 2 new souls clutched to her breast, left to the mercy of a winter that knew none. Her name was Ilara, though few had ever spoken it with kindness, and now, as the biting wind whipped around the skeletal eaves of the forgotten church on Whisperwind Ridge, it seemed her name, like her hope, would be swallowed by the storm. The heavy oak door of the church had been no comfort, merely a barrier between the indifferent shelter within and the active malice of the elements without. Her father, a man whose heart was as barren as the frozen fields he tilled, had driven her here in the dead of night, his face a mask of cold fury and shame. An abomination, he'd hissed, his words colder than the snowflakes that clung to Ilara's thin shawl. Tainted blood, all of you. Let God sort you out, if he's even listening to the likes of you. And then he was gone, the rattle of his wagon wheels fading into the howl of the blizzard, leaving Ilara with Finian, barely a month old, and little Willow, just 2 weeks his senior, nestled in a makeshift sling against her chest. They were her half-siblings, born of her stepmother's desperate folly and now, apparently, her burden alone. The stepmother had vanished days before, leaving only a note of despair and the 2 infants. Ilara, only 16 summers herself, had been deemed the problem, the evidence of sin that must be expunged. The church was cold, so cold. Dust lay thick on the pews, and the stained glass windows, depicting serene saints, seemed to mock her with their placid indifference. She huddled in a corner, her own meager body warmth a pathetic shield against the encroaching frost. The babies stirred, whimpering, their tiny faces pale. Ilara had nothing for them. No milk, no food, only the rapidly fading heat of her own young life. She hummed a broken lullaby, her voice trembling, the notes lost in the vast, empty space. Despair, a chilling companion, settled over her. She had tried the door of the small parsonage beside the church, but it was locked, shuttered, as abandoned as the house of God itself. It seemed the entire world had conspired to erase her. She pressed her cheek against Finian's downy head, a tear finally escaping, freezing instantly on her skin. She did not cry for herself, not anymore. She had learned long ago that her tears changed nothing. But for these innocents, these blameless babes thrust into her care, her heart fractured anew. Hours passed, or perhaps an eternity. The first grey light of a cruel dawn began to filter through the grimy windows, painting the scene in shades of desolation. Ilara's limbs were numb, her thoughts slow and muddled. The baby's cries had weakened to faint, heartbreaking mewls. This, she thought, was how it ended. A forgotten girl and 2 forgotten babes, frozen statues in a forgotten shrine. She closed her eyes, a strange sort of peace, the peace of utter surrender, washing over her. The wind howled a final, mournful dirge. Then, through the storm's lament, came another sound. A rhythmic, crunching cadence. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, drawing nearer. Ilara's heart, a frozen bird in her chest, gave a single, startled flutter. Was it her father, returned to ensure his cruel work was done? Or something else, something the storm had conjured? The great oak door creaked, groaned, and then swung inward with a blast of snow and wind, revealing a figure silhouetted against the pale, furious morning. He was a mountain of a man, clad in thick furs and worn leather, an axe glinting dully on his shoulder. Snow clung to his beard and eyebrows, making him seem a creature of the winter itself. Elias Thorne, the lumberjack from the deep woods, a man as solitary and untamed as the wilderness he called home. He rarely came down to the settlements, and when he did, folks gave him a wide berth. They whispered of a lost wife, a grief that had carved him into stone. He paused on the threshold, his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, sweeping the desolate interior. They found Ilara in her frozen huddle, a pale wraith clutching 2 smaller bundles. For a long moment, he simply stood there, an unreadable expression on his weathered face. Ilara braced herself, expecting harsh words, judgment, perhaps even violence. She had known little else from men. But Elias said nothing. His gaze lingered on the infants, a flicker of something unidentifiable in their depths. He'd come to the church seeking refuge from the worst of the blizzard, a place he hadn't entered in years, not since Martha. He hadn't expected to find life, however fragile, clinging on within its decaying walls. He saw the desperation in the girl's wide, haunted eyes, the blue tinge to the baby's tiny lips. He saw not sin, but suffering. Without a word, he shrugged off the heavy pack from his shoulders, the movement economical, powerful. He pulled out a thick wool blanket, smelling of pine smoke and the wild. He approached her slowly, not wanting to frighten her further. Elara flinched but held her ground, her arms tightening protectively around Finian and Willow. He stopped a few feet away, his silence more unnerving than any shouted threat. Then he knelt, the snow melting around his knees, and gently, so gently it made her breath catch, he draped the blanket over her and the children. His large, calloused hand brushed her cheek, rough but surprisingly warm. It was the first touch of kindness she had felt in a lifetime. He still said nothing. He rose, turned, and began to work. With swift efficiency, he gathered broken bits of pews and fallen timbers, using his axe to split them into kindling. In the ancient stone hearth, long cold, he laid a fire. Soon, a small, courageous flame flickered to life, pushing back the oppressive chill. The scent of wood smoke, clean and reassuring, filled the air. Elara watched him, bewildered. This stoic giant, who looked as if he could wrestle bears and fell ancient trees with his bare hands, was tending to them, with a quiet, focused intensity. He rummaged in his pack again, producing a small, soot-blackened pot and a water skin. He melted snow, then added something from a pouch, dried herbs, perhaps, or oats. A thin gruel began to simmer, its meager aroma a promise of sustenance. He did not ask her story. He did not question her presence. He simply acted. He saw a need, and he met it. This raw, unspoken compassion was more profound than any sermon she had ever heard within these walls. When the gruel was ready, he ladled a small amount into a wooden cup he carried and offered it to her. His eyes met hers, direct, unwavering. "Eat," he rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly, like stones shifting in a riverbed. It was the first word he'd spoken. Elara hesitated, then, her hands trembling, she took the cup. The warmth spread through her fingers, up her arms. The simple food was life itself. He watched her drink, then gestured to the babies. "Them?" Elara shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. There was nothing she could offer them. A shadow crossed his face. He understood. He looked around the church, then back at her, his decision made. He scooped up his pack, then, to her astonishment, he carefully, gently, lifted Finian from her arms. The baby, impossibly small in his massive hands, gave a faint whimper. Elias held him against his broad chest, his touch surprisingly deft. He then looked at Elara, a clear, unspoken instruction in his eyes. She understood. She clutched Willow tighter and, using the wall for support, slowly, painfully, got to her feet. The blanket, smelling of him, of safety, was a comforting weight. He led the way out of the church, back into the raging blizzard. He did not offer her his hand, but he walked slowly, breaking a path through the deepening snow, his broad back a shield against the wind. Elara followed, a tiny, determined shadow in his wake, into an unknown future, guided by a stranger's silent promise. The journey to Elias Thorne's cabin was a blur of biting wind, swirling snow, and a desperate, tenacious hope. He moved through the forest with an animal's instinct, seeming to know every tree, every dip in the terrain, even as the blizzard sought to obliterate all landmarks. Elara, weak from hunger and cold, stumbled often, but she never fell. The image of Elias's broad back, shielding Finian from the storm's fury, urged her onward. He carried the infant as if he were precious glass, his large hands surprisingly gentle. Each step was an agony, but also a step away from the desolation of the church, from the cruelty of her past. After what felt like an eternity, the trees thinned, and a small, sturdy cabin emerged from the white chaos, smoke curling from its stone chimney like a prayer. It was a humble dwelling, built of thick logs, chinked with mud and moss, looking as though it had grown from the earth itself. It was the most beautiful sight Elara had ever seen. Elias pushed open the heavy plank door, and a wave of warmth washed over them, the scent of wood smoke, dried herbs, and something else, something indefinable that spoke of shelter, of sanctuary. Inside, it was small, rustic, but meticulously clean. A single room, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall, a rough-hewn table and 2 stools, a bed built into a corner, piled with furs. It was a man's space, simple and unadorned, yet it felt safer than any place Ilara had ever known. Elias gently laid Finian on the bed, then turned to Ilara, who stood hesitantly by the door, Willow still clutched tightly. He gestured towards the fire. "Warmth," he said, his voice still that low rumble. He then set about stoking the fire, adding logs until it blazed brightly, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Ilara, moving as if in a dream, slowly approached the hearth, sinking onto the braided rug before it, Willow still in her arms. The heat seeped into her bones, painful at first, then deeply comforting. The babies, sensing the change, stirred. Elias, observing their tiny, restless movements, frowned. He went to a small chest and rummaged within, producing a clean, soft piece of deerskin and a small wooden bowl. He took snow from outside, melted it, and carefully, with a clean rag, wiped the babies' faces. Then, he did something that made Ilara's breath catch. He took a small tin of goat's milk powder, a precious commodity in these parts, and mixed a small amount with warm water. He dipped the corner of the deerskin into the milk and gently offered it to Finian, then to Willow. The infants, ravenous, latched on, suckling weakly at first, then with more strength. Ilara watched, tears welling in her eyes, blurring the image of this gruff, silent man so tenderly feeding her charges. He said nothing of where the milk came from, or why a solitary lumberjack would possess such a thing. Perhaps it was a relic from his past, from the life he'd shared with his Martha. His actions spoke louder than any words. Days turned into weeks. A quiet rhythm established itself in the small cabin. Ilara, as her strength returned, took over the care of Finian and Willow. She found her hands remembered old skills, tending to the infants, mending their few tattered garments with thread Elias provided. She kept the cabin tidy, swept the hearth, and learned to cook simple meals with the supplies Elias brought back from his hunting or trapping expeditions: rabbit stew, roasted grouse, jarney cakes made from coarse cornmeal. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her presence a soft counterpoint to Elias's stoic silence. He would watch her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable. He never asked about her past, never questioned the origin of the children. He simply accepted their presence. He provided wood, food, and an unspoken protection that wrapped around them like the warmest fur. He would leave before dawn, the sound of his axe echoing faintly from the deep woods, and return at dusk, weary but steady. He would often bring something small back with him, a handful of late-season berries he'd found in a sheltered spot, a bird's feather of startling blue for the babies to gaze at. One evening, he returned with a small block of pine and, sitting by the fire, began to carve. Ilara watched, fascinated, as his calloused hands, so strong and capable with an axe, moved with surprising delicacy, coaxing a shape from the wood. By the time the babies were asleep, he had fashioned a tiny, smooth bird, its wings outstretched. He placed it silently on the mantel, then looked at Ilara. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, so fleeting she thought she might have imagined it. But the bird remained, a small token of something. Affection? Perhaps. Or maybe just a shared humanity. Ilara, in turn, began to leave a bowl of warm stew for him by the fire when he returned late. She darned his worn mittens, patched a tear in his heavy coat. Small acts of service, weaving a fragile tapestry of connection in the quiet spaces between them. She rarely spoke, her voice still shy, her words carefully chosen. But she would hum to the babies, soft, wordless melodies that filled the cabin with a gentle sound. Elias would pause in his mending of a snowshoe or sharpening of his axe, listening, his rugged face softening almost imperceptibly. He learned the babies' routines, their tiny preferences. He knew Finian liked to be rocked a certain way, that Willow would quiet if he hummed a low, tuneless drone. He never overtly showed affection, but his actions were a language Ilara was beginning to understand. The land around them was harsh, unforgiving, yet it provided. And in its isolation, it offered a strange kind of peace. Here, in this small cabin, surrounded by the vast, silent forest, Ilara felt a sense of belonging she had never known. She was no longer Ilara the outcast, Ilara the burden. Here, she was simply Ilara, the caregiver, the quiet presence who kept the hearth warm. And Elias? Elias was the protector, the provider, the silent guardian of their fragile sanctuary. Trust, unspoken but profound, grew between them, nurtured by shared meals, quiet evenings by the fire, and the innocent gurgles of two babies who knew only warmth and care. The winter raged outside, but within the cabin, a tentative spring was blooming in their hearts. The slow thaw of winter mirrored the gradual easing of tension within the small cabin. Ilara found her voice, not in long conversations, but in quiet observations about the weather or a soft word of thanks when Elias brought in a particularly fine piece of firewood. He, in turn, would sometimes offer a gruff comment about the deer tracks he'd seen, or the way the wind was shifting. It was a language of shared experience, sparse yet meaningful. Finian and Willow thrived under their combined care. They grew plump and rosy-cheeked, their gurgles turning into happy coos. Ilara fashioned soft toys for them from scraps of fabric and dried moss, her fingers nimble and creative. Elias, watching her, once carved a tiny, perfectly formed wooden wolf, its head tilted as if listening. He laid it beside the bird on the mantel, another silent offering. Ilara picked it up, her fingers tracing its smooth lines. She looked at him, a genuine smile illuminating her face, a smile that reached her eyes, making them shine like the summer sky she barely remembered. Elias cleared his throat and looked away, but not before she saw the warmth in his own gaze. The cabin, once just a shelter, began to feel like a home. Ilara planted a few hardy herb seeds she found in a forgotten tin in a small box by the window, tending them with a fierce devotion. The scent of new green life, however small, was a promise. She learned the rhythms of Elias's life, anticipating his needs. A hot drink when he came in from the cold, his worn boots set by the fire to dry, a fresh wick in the oil lamp. He, in turn, began to leave small wildflowers he found pushing through the snow on the table, their delicate beauty a stark contrast to his rugged appearance. He even, on one occasion, attempted to hum along to one of Ilara's lullabies, the sound a surprisingly gentle rumble in his chest. The babies giggled, and Ilara's heart swelled. These small moments, these quiet acts of kindness, were building something strong and true between them. They were becoming a family, not of blood, but of circumstance, of shared hardship, and of a growing, unspoken affection. But the sanctuary they had built was a fragile thing, existing in a bubble of isolation. The world outside, with its judgments and its cruelties, had not forgotten them. As spring finally began to assert its gentle dominion over the land, melting the snow and bringing birdsong back to the forest, Elias knew their isolation could not last. He needed supplies, tools, things the forest could not provide. The nearest settlement, a rough-and-tumble logging town called Redemption, was a 2-day trek away. He had put off the journey for as long as possible, loath to leave Ilara and the children, loath to expose them to the prying eyes and wagging tongues of the town. But necessity gnawed. One morning, he announced his departure. "Need supplies," he said, his gaze fixed on the axe he was sharpening. "Be back." 3 days. Maybe 4-inch Ilara felt a chill despite the warming air. The thought of him leaving, even for a short time, filled her with an unfamiliar dread. She had come to rely on his presence, his quiet strength, more than she realized. "Be careful, Elias," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He looked up then, his eyes meeting hers. He gave a single, curt nod. "You, too." He left at dawn, his figure disappearing into the misty woods. The cabin felt suddenly vast and empty without him. Ilara busied herself with the children, with her chores, trying to push away the tendrils of fear. But the silence was heavier now, tinged with anxiety. It was on the 2nd day of his absence that the outside world intruded. A group of women from Redemption, led by the stern-faced wife of the town's deacon, Martha Henderson, a woman whose piety was matched only by her capacity for judgment, had come visiting. They claimed to be on a charitable mission, bringing old clothes and unwanted food, but their eyes were sharp, their questions pointed. They had heard whispers, rumors carried by a trapper who had glimpsed Ilara from a distance. A young woman living alone with a reclusive lumberjack and 2 babies of unknown parentage. It was a scandal waiting to happen, a stain on the moral fabric of their small community. Mrs. Henderson, a woman who bore a striking, if harsher, resemblance to Elias's late wife, surveyed Ilara with undisguised disapproval. "Child," she began, her voice crisp and authoritative, "it is not proper for you to be here alone with a man like Thorn. And these infants. Where are their kin?" Ilara, pale but resolute, clutched Finian tighter. Willow, sensing the tension, began to fret in her makeshift crib. "They are with me," Ilara said, her voice quiet but firm. "We are safe here." "Safe," one of the other women scoffed. "With that wild man? He's barely civilized. And what of your reputation, girl? Or have you none to speak of?" The words were like stones, bruising and cruel. Ilara felt the old shame, the old fear, rise up within her. But then she thought of Elias, of his quiet kindness, his unwavering protection. She thought of the carved bird, the wildflowers, the shared silence that spoke more than words. "Mr. Thorn has been good to us," she managed, lifting her chin. Mrs. Henderson's eyes narrowed. "Good? Or has he taken advantage of your situation? These children, are they his?" The implication was vile, and Ilara recoiled as if struck. "No. They were my stepmother's. She left them. And your father? Why are you not with your family?" Ilara's silence was answer enough. The women exchanged knowing glances. "A runaway, then? With 2 bastards?" Harlot, the word, hissed by one of the younger women, hung in the air, venomous and ugly. Ilara flinched, her face burning. She wanted to scream, to rage, but she knew it would do no good. These women had already judged her. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. "The children cannot stay here. It is not a fit environment. They will be taken to the orphanage in Redemption. And you, girl, will come with us. We will find suitable work for you." Perhaps in the laundry the threat was clear. They would tear her small, precious world apart. They would take Finian and Willow, send them to a place of cold charity, and condemn Ilara to a life of drudgery and shame. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Ilara's throat. She backed away, shielding the babies with her body. "No," she whispered. "You can't." Just as Mrs. Henderson reached out a grasping hand, the cabin door swung open with such force it slammed against the wall. Elias stood framed in the doorway, his face a thundercloud. Elias Thorn had returned a day early, a gnawing unease having driven him to push through the night. He had seen the tracks of shod horses near his property line, an unwelcome sign. Now, seeing the clutch of judgmental women cornering Ilara, his Ilara, a cold fury unlike anything he had felt since Martha's passing surged through him. His eyes, usually the color of a calm winter sky, were now chips of glacial ice, burning with a protective fire. He said nothing, but his presence filled the small cabin, radiating an intensity that made the air crackle. The women from Redemption froze, their smug superiority vanishing in the face of his silent, potent rage. Mrs. Henderson, though visibly shaken, attempted to regain her composure. "Mr. Thorn," she said, her voice a little too high, "we were just concerned for the girl. And the infants. This is hardly a suitable arrangement." Elias took a slow step into the cabin, then another, his gaze never leaving Mrs. Henderson. The women instinctively recoiled, shuffling backwards. He stopped directly in front of her, towering over her. The scent of the forest, of pine and earth and something wild, clung to him, a stark contrast to the cloying lavender water favored by the townswomen. "Concerned." His voice was dangerously low, a growl rumbling deep in his chest. "Or meddling." Ilara, emboldened by his presence, stepped forward to stand slightly behind him, Willow now cradled protectively in her arms, Finian still sleeping soundly in his crib. She felt the warmth of Elias's back against her shoulder, a solid, unshakable shield. These children require proper care, a Christian upbringing, Mrs. Henderson insisted, though her conviction was wavering under his fierce stare. And this girl, she needs guidance. She is unwed, alone. She is not alone, Elias stated, his words cutting through the air like his axe through timber. Each syllable was heavy, deliberate. He turned his head slightly, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as it rested on Elara for a fleeting second, then hardened again as he faced her accusers. She is with me. A collective gasp went through the women. The implication was scandalous, but Elias didn't care for their small-minded interpretations. And these children, he continued, his voice resonating with an undeniable authority, they are under my protection. This is their home, Mrs. Henderson sputtered, but it is not decent. What will people say? You cannot simply take them in. They have no name, no standing. Elias's jaw tightened. He had lived his life apart from the town's petty judgments, finding solace in the honesty of the wilderness. He would not let their poisoned whispers touch the fragile peace he had found with Elara and these innocent babes. He looked at Elara then, truly looked at her. He saw not the outcast the world perceived, but a woman of quiet strength, of immense tenderness, a woman who had brought light back into his shadowed life. He saw the resilience in her eyes, the gentle curve of her lips as she hummed to the babies, the way her hands, though small, were endlessly capable. He had watched her coax life from dormant seeds, create comfort from meager supplies, and love two abandoned children as if they were her own. In that moment, something shifted within him, a final wall crumbling. The grief for Martha would always be a part of him, a quiet ache, but it no longer defined him. Elara, and the future she represented, did. He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently taking Elara's, his fingers lacing through hers. It was a public declaration, unmistakable and profound. Elara's breath hitched, her eyes wide with surprise, then filled with a dawning, radiant joy. Her name, Elias said, his voice ringing with a conviction that brooked no argument, is Elara. And these children, they are Finian and Willow. He spoke their names clearly, giving them an identity, a place. They are not nameless. They are ours. The word hung in the air, a shield and a promise. And this, he swept his arm to encompass the small, warm cabin, is our home. What happens within these walls is our concern, not yours. Elara is a good woman. A kind woman. She has brought warmth to this place, and life. He looked directly at Mrs. Henderson, his eyes blazing. She has more decency and Christian charity in her little finger than you and all your gossiping companions possess in your entire bodies. She took in abandoned babes when others turned away. She has suffered enough at the hands of cruel and judgmental people. His voice, though not loud, carried the weight of irrefutable truth. Now, you will leave. And you will not return. If I hear one more whisper against her, one more unkind word, you will answer to me. The threat was unspoken but terrifyingly clear. The women, pale and cowed, needed no further encouragement. They practically stumbled over each other in their haste to exit the cabin, scurrying away like startled mice, their mission of charity utterly defeated. Mrs. Henderson cast one last venomous glare, but it faltered under Elias's unwavering gaze. Then they were gone, their retreating footsteps swallowed by the sounds of the forest. Silence descended, thick and charged. Elara looked at Elias, her heart overflowing. Tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow this time, but of overwhelming gratitude and a love so profound it left her breathless. He had not just defended her, he had claimed her. He had given her a name, a place, a family. He turned to her, his expression softening, the fierce protector giving way to the gentleman she had come to know. He reached out and tenderly wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. No more tears, he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. Not like that. She leaned into his touch, a sob escaping her. Elias, he drew her closer, his arms strong and sure around her shoulders, holding her, and by extension Willow, against his solid frame. Finian stirred in his crib and let out a contented sigh, as if sensing the rightness of it all. It is enough, Elias said softly, looking down at her, then at the children. We are enough. And Elara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that it was true. Here, in this wild, beautiful place, with this strong, silent man and 2 precious babes, she had found her sanctuary, her home, her heart. The storm had passed, both outside and within. The departure of the townswomen marked a turning point. The fragile sanctuary Elias and Ilara had built was no longer a secret, but it was now undeniably theirs, defended and claimed. Life in the cabin settled into a new rhythm, one underscored by a deeper, acknowledged bond. Elias did not speak of love in grand pronouncements, but his actions were a constant affirmation. He would seek out Ilara's gaze across the room, a quiet understanding passing between them. He carved more intricate toys for Finian and Willow, a lumbering bear, a graceful deer, each one a testament to his growing affection. He began to share more of himself, small stories of his youth in the woods, tales of his Martha, not with lingering sadness, but with a gentle remembrance that made space for new joys. Ilara, in turn, blossomed under his quiet regard. Her laughter, once rare, became more frequent, light and musical, often elicited by the antics of the growing children or a dry, unexpected witticism from Elias. She spoke more freely, sharing her own simple observations, her hopes for the small garden she was determined to make flourish. She taught Elias the lullabies her own mother had sung to her, her voice clear and sweet in the firelight. They were a family, forged in hardship, bound by love. The townsfolk of Redemption kept their distance, awed and perhaps a little frightened by Elias's fierce defense. But whispers turned to grudging respect, especially when it became clear that the lumberjack, the girl, and the 2 babes were thriving. Occasionally, a trapper or a lost traveler would receive shelter at their cabin, and they would leave speaking of the quiet warmth, the well-tended children, and the unshakable bond between the stoic man and the gentle woman. Years passed, seasons turned. Finian and Willow grew from babes into sturdy, bright-eyed children, their world the vast forest, their guardians Ilara and Elias. They knew nothing of abandonment, only of love and security. Elias taught Finian to track, to read the signs of the forest, while Ilara taught Willow the names of the wildflowers and the secrets of the hearth. They were children of the wilderness, wild and free, yet gentle and kind, reflecting the spirits of those who raised them. More children came, sons and daughters born of Ilara and Elias's quiet love, their laughter echoing through the trees, filling the cabin with a boisterous joy that Elias, in his solitary grief, had never imagined possible. The small cabin was expanded, log, by Elias's strong hands, with Ilara always by his side, offering quiet suggestions or a cool drink. The garden flourished under her touch, providing vegetables and herbs that supplemented Elias's hunting. The carved bird and wolf on the mantel were joined by a growing collection of small wooden figures, each a marker of their shared life. Ilara never forgot the cold desolation of the church, the cruelty of her past, but it no longer held power over her. It was a scar, a reminder of how far she had come, of the unexpected grace she had found. Elias, too, found healing. The sharp edges of his grief for Martha softened, replaced by a deep contentment, a quiet joy in the bustling life that now filled his home. He was still a man of few words, but his smiles were more frequent, his eyes held a lasting warmth. One crisp autumn evening, with their children asleep, Ilara and Elias sat by the fire, much as they had in those first uncertain days. He reached for her hand, his fingers, calloused from years of hard work, closing around hers with familiar strength and tenderness. "You brought the spring, Ilara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "To this cabin." "To my heart." Ilara leaned her head on his shoulder, her heart full. "And you, Elias," she whispered, "you were my shelter from the storm." They sat in comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the gentle breathing of their children. The legacy they had built was not one of riches or renown, but of love, resilience, and the enduring power of kindness. It was a legacy whispered on the wind through the pines, a testament to the fact that even in the harshest wilderness, a family could take root and flourish. They had faced the cruelty of the world and answered it with unwavering devotion, creating a haven of love where before there had been only solitude and sorrow. Their story became a quiet legend in the region, a reminder that true worth is not dictated by society, but by the strength of one's character and the depth of one's heart. And so, their life unfolded, rich with the simple, profound moments that weave the tapestry of a shared existence. The first steps of their children, the first words spoken, the scraped knees mended with a kiss and a poultice, the stories told by firelight. Elias taught his sons the way of the axe and the forest, but also the gentleness required to handle a newborn fawn. Ilara taught her daughters the art of the hearth and the garden, but also the courage to speak their truth. They faced hardships, for life in the wilderness was never truly easy: harsh winters, lean hunting seasons, the occasional sickness that swept through their growing family. But they faced it all together, their bond a rock against the storms. They grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year, a quiet river running sure and true. Their children grew and eventually found their own paths, some staying near the forest that had nurtured them, others venturing out into the wider world, but all carrying within them the legacy of Elias and Ilara's strength and compassion. The cabin, weathered and expanded, stood as a testament to their enduring love, a beacon of warmth in the vast wilderness. And even when their time on this earth was done, and they were laid to rest side by side beneath the whispering pines, their story lived on. It lived on in their children, and their children's children. It lived on in the kindness they had shown, the sanctuary they had built, the love that had redeemed them both. You see, this story, like so many others, reminds us that even in the darkest of times, when abandonment and cruelty seem to be the only currency, a single act of kindness, a flicker of human decency, can change everything. It teaches us that family is not always born of blood, but often forged in the fires of shared experience and mutual protection. Elias saw past the labels the world tried to pin on Ilara. He saw her true worth, her gentle spirit, her resilient heart. And in offering her shelter, he found his own salvation. Ilara, in turn, brought warmth and life not just to his cabin, but to his soul. Theirs is a legacy of courage, the courage to stand against societal judgment, the courage to protect the vulnerable, and the courage to love openly and fiercely. It is a reminder that the quietest acts of service can be the loudest declarations of love. Think about the Ilaras and Eliases in your own world. Perhaps they are not in a cabin in the woods, but they are there, facing their own storms, needing their own protectors, offering their own quiet strengths. We all have the capacity to be an Elias, to offer shelter and stand for what is right. We all have the resilience of an Ilara, to endure and to bring light into darkness. Their story is an echo of the strength that lies within us all. If this story of unlikely love, of found family, and of the enduring power of the human spirit has touched your heart, then please, let us know. Subscribe to our channel, for there are countless stories like this waiting to be told, tales of hope and resilience that remind us of the best of what we can be. Share this story so that others too may find inspiration in the quiet courage of a lumberjack and the resilient outcast he chose to call family. Thank you for listening.